So this is a response video to Nathaniel Thomas, CJ Jones, and Michaela Clark. So first is Nathaniel's video. We had opposing views. He believed that Story 2 did a better job at capturing Anish's theme. Unlike me, I believe that Story 1 did. He used interesting quotes to get across his point. So that was something. So first quote he used was, "Respect arises not from the heart, but discreet rules and deference." Saying, and he used this and tied it to Anish's perspective and how the respect is tied to the sameness and not being different. And saying like the sameness of the chicken in the second and version 2 of the story, he tied that together, which I found really interesting. I never thought that one would use that quote for that, so that was something different. He also uses like Anish's loyalty to the Sultan to also explain like Anishte, like his loyalty to the art style, but also like his obedience to the Sultan. That's also seen in the chapter as well as both versions of the story actually, but specifically in version 2. He uses quote from version 2 about how some chefs secretly like the Venetian style, and he ties it to a miniaturist who took up a brush without the care and diligence to read the text he was illustrating, was motivated by nothing more than greed. And he links the two together, and how, like, I guess he also links pride with artistic cooperation or corporation. I think I meant to say cooperation. I wrote that down. But like, it was very interesting the way he explained his like quotes as well as the text, his version of the story. It was definitely a different perspective. I didn't necessarily focus on capturing the similarities between the chapter and interpreting the versions of the story in that way. I used it more so to explain Anish's own feelings and how he felt that's how I kind of used the versions of the story, since it was Anish's theme and perspective. I thought more of tying it that way and not necessarily the way that Nathaniel did tie it together. Next is a response to CJ Jones. So he also, like Nathaniel, believed that Story 2 did a better job at capturing like the theme of chapter 5, which is Anish's perspective. Something that CJ said was that Eastern artists worried that using perspective would ruin their connection to God's order, which I found very interesting, and how he used it and he connected it back to the chicken, where like the chefs were worried about cooking with a new style, cooking their chicken differently from what they knew. CJ also says that Story 1 feels more like Anish's personal journal, and it's more dramatic, which I found interesting considering that the chapter itself, chapter 5, it's from his perspective, so it's supposed to be technically his personal journal, as well as it being dramatic. Like, yeah, I guess it would be dramatic. I would think so, considering the first half of the chapter really talks about actually no, more than half, but like a good majority of the chapter talks about how his nephew likes his daughter, and then how he is basically wrestling with his own inner thoughts. I would think it would be more dramatic. So he says he's basically talking about how story 1 doesn't necessarily focus on the East and West styles, and is saying that story 2 is more direct about the likeness between the food and the art styles, which I found interesting because in story 1 it talks about it multiple times, how like the first way of chicken, the chicken that is traditional to them, they talk about the 2 different chicken styles, like the Venetian style of chicken, how they cooked, the Franks cooked the chicken, and then the new modern chicken, and then like the story version number 1 does talk about both versions of the chicken, which is insinuating both versions of art styles. So it's talking about both. So it was weird that he said that. I felt that story 1, yes, it was more to Inishite's personal feelings, but that's the whole point. So, I don't know. But that's what I thought. So we did have opposing views. So maybe that's why I was just thinking that. But that's just what I thought. And next is the response to Michaela Clarke. So I like how she explains everything, almost like an introduction. And we both believe the same thing, that story version number 1 explained Inishite's theme better and his perspective better. For me, yes, we had the same views, but I don't think it was like for the same reasons, if that makes sense. Like, she focused more on the material and like trying to find the connection, like grasping to find the connections between the chapter itself and then also like the text, and she was just trying to relate everything back to it, even though it was more like a reach to me, instead of focusing more on like how it was an emotional connection to Inishite's personal feelings, since it was his perspective and his chapter that explained what he felt. So I found that interesting how she took it, I guess, and how she explained how it was more like Inishite's theme, or more like chapter 5, basically. Like, we had the same views, but she explained it differently than how I did. She mentioned how the chefs, it was an interesting take, how she said the chefs represent the people, the chefs in story version 1 represent the people Inishite hired to basically make the book, like to illustrate in the book, the other miniaturists. Yeah, I agree with that. And she had an interesting take on how Inishite can't trust anyone and the book can't be messed up due to jealousies. That was an interesting take. It was very different outlook for sure. We definitely focused on 2 different things, so it was another perspective that I guess unlocked. That is the response to all 3 of their videos.